Welcome back to the show, everybody. It's your host, John Scardina. I am so excited for this episode. I've been focusing a lot lately on organizational emergency management and the nuances and the differences between government emergency management and what we need to do as a field to address it because we're looking at the future. I have an expert on the show right now that talks about emergency management and security that can talk about my EM insecurities. Stupid pun. But it is Zack Borst. He is a really cool guy. I've met him a little while ago, and we just had really cool conversations and said, I need to get this guy on the show so we can talk about it. Zack, welcome.
Thank you for having me, John. Really appreciate it. Expert is a strong term. I'm a generalist. I've done a little bit of everything, so hopefully I can pass on some of that knowledge.
Well, most people get the phrase wrong. Oh, did I bring this up last episode? I might have brought this up last episode. But most people get the phrase wrong. A jack of all trades is a master of none, but better than a master of one. People always forget that last part. So to be a generalist and to keep learning, I would say that's how you stay in front of the curve. So I'm first rebuttal of the show, but I definitely have a lot of respect for what you've done and what you're doing now. But before we get into like all of that, let's just talk about real quick your very cool podcast, which is not on the Readiness Lab network, by the way. So I'm just being a good guy here, Scuttlebutt. So if you're gonna like this show, make sure you gotta check out his podcast. I'm sure you're gonna have new episodes because you're a cool guy. But
yeah, it's a little bit ridiculous. It's me and my buddy. Honestly, it's really just a way that we can catch up because it's so hard to get each other together. But it's a lot more into conspiracies and weird stuff and military stuff, which is one of my other lives. But yeah, it was fun. I enjoy it. It keeps my creative juices flowing. And so I was kind of excited to get invited onto this. I enjoy this stuff. So
it's awesome. Well, I had a lot of fun listening to it. And, I'm going to do a quick call out for some of our audience that called me out on a previous episode that's actually gone now because it was the worst episode ever. But, they're like, hey, you kind of backpedaled, or it seemed like you backpedaled on January 6th and how that it was like the worst. I don't know, like it was definitely an insurrection. It was like borderline, like top 3, top 5 worst. I want to say worst events in U.S. history because obviously slavery. And all of that. But definitely in modern history, last 50 years, just so embarrassing. And I liked how not only you brought that up on your podcast, but you're making fun of it. So kudos to you, sir, for saying what I feel very adamantly about it. So
yeah, well, and I think in light of sort of what we're going to be talking about, the failure of physical security that occurred there was not because it wasn't in place. It was because of policy and stuff, which we can talk about a little bit. But
yes,
that's sort of like, what do we do? Cool, we have all these features in place, but when do we turn them on? So yeah, more fodder for discussion.
I totally did that on purpose. I was like, hey, this is a great way to talk about physical security and just security policy. So let's just jump into it then. Okay, so let's talk about it from obviously pre-disaster, the planning perspective. You have, I would say, 3 main areas, and you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
You have like the physical design to try to steer people. Then you have your physical security, like your actual security measures. That would be like your metal detectors or whatever, gates. And then you have your personnel in that security. And for an organizational level emergency manager, government keeps these things so, like totally separate. FBI versus FEMA, not even under DHS. And DHS is kind of like in the middle. But for an organizational level emergency manager, you're looking at your counterpart who is, the head of security, right? And you might even be directing them. So what are the key areas for you to start setting up the idea of threat analysis or threat prevention, really?
Yeah, so my role when it came to physical security, so I was an emergency manager for a medium-sized university. So we had anywhere from 12,000 students and, several thousand faculty and other, people visiting the campus at any time. So one of the issues that I had to face is that our physical security had to be pretty fluid because it's a public university. So In theory, people are supposed to come through and be able to enjoy all of the benefits of having a giant university on your
In theory.
town. Yes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what we had to worry about was, we had residential facilities there. So when you're talking about housing and protecting people while they sleep and keeping their stuff safe, so you have access control issues. We had situations, obviously the big concern that most higher ed institutions and most other campus institutions is an active shooter or some sort of active threat.
That's
So
right.
the ability to quickly lock down facilities, which, our campus is over 200 years old. So that's really challenging. There's a lot of old doors there that do not have electronic access control. And then there's like sports and stuff. So, we would do threat analysis every year, threat and hazard analysis every year to kind of update stuff, and then line up with like the state thyra, so we understood what they're worried about and try to sync up everything. But as far as like kind of keeping that thing moving so that you're constantly up to date, it's like training, exercising, planning all the time, and keeping all your stakeholders involved. So, again, I'm not necessarily an expert in physical security, but that's like every single incident that we dealt with at the university when I was there had a physical security concern. And then, again, when it comes down to the very crux of physical security is the person, who's going to be involved in it. So we're talking students, faculty, and visitors. They're your weakest point, because the person who holds the door open on a secured building, now you've compromised however many thousands of dollars, maybe millions of dollars you've invested in try to protecting that building. So you've got to keep everybody, trained and prepared and thinking about their own physical security and helping out, with their business or their university or their hospital.
Yeah, so I can remember working for a federal agency in DC, and one of the first things I did for my hazard vulnerability assessment is I just went through and looked at, I just walked the ground and started taking pictures, like finding lights that were out, finding dark places I went through at night. Want to make sure that we had well lit areas. Are the 911 like the blue call center?
Oh yeah.
Just
I
making
hate those
sure
things,
everything.
by the way.
I know. Tell me about it.
They're broken all the time.
Do they even work? Yeah.
So that's the other thing. So there is sort of like, there's security by design, and then there's sort of like this theater of security. The blue lights are largely theater of security. If you're getting chased by someone across the campus and you're not going to go, I'm going to run to that blue light. You're like, this person is, bears trying to eat me. We've had moose on campus. You're not running to the blue light. You're trying to get as far away from that hazard as possible. But people like it. It makes them feel safe. There's some question as to whether or not the blue lights maybe deter some, crime and stuff. But, that's another thing that you have to take into consideration. Sometimes the theater is important. I mean, that's like, you could argue TSA. Certainly they have, I mean, obviously they do stop stuff. It's been found, they catch people with weapons and everything else. But if somebody truly wants to get through there, they're going to do it. But there's some degree of like freaking people out ahead of time so that they don't do it. You want to kind of scare the bad guys into thinking you're better at what you do than maybe you are. So yeah, cameras is the same thing.
Yeah, I think it was 2016 where the DHS did a test of the security of TSA, and they did, I think, 72 tests and 69 they got through.
Yeah,
and it's like,
I don't know what more could we possibly do. You're getting X-rayed. You're taking your shoes off. You're standing there like a moron as this machine scans you, and there's a naked X-ray of you up on the screen.
Yeah,
I mean, it's about as intrusive as I think anyone's going to allow. And
you know what? Fair enough. That's a good point.
Yeah.
But there's also other good points. We want to get to them real quick, but we're going to take a quick break for some of our sponsors. Real quick, we're going to pause for this week's Disaster Tough endorsements. This show is owned and operated by professional emergency managers at Doberman Emergency Management. We apply disaster tough logic by protecting life, property, and business continuity through planning, mitigation, and training. Check us out at DobermanEMG.com or click on the show notes. Radio comms just got a major breakthrough with the L3 Harris XL Extreme 400P. It's the newest and toughest radio out there. Built by their space and tactical teams, the XL Extreme Series can take a beating. 1,700-degree blast of heat, repeated 3-meter drops, rain, salt water, you name it. The XL Extreme Series by L3 Harris can take it. Visit l3harris.com to schedule your demo today. The battle to monitor and contain COVID-19 just got exponentially better for us. We are officially introducing an electronic, reusable, yes, reusable COVID-19 test through our sponsors. It's called the COVID Plus Test, created by Tiger Tech, distributed by FS Global. This is the first FDA-authorized, rapid, non-invasive pre-screener. It's extremely easy to use. Forget those one-time use swabs. This is a disaster-tough technology. For more information on the COVID Plus test, check out our show notes. Okay, let's jump back in. So we're talking about the theater of security and the purpose of theater of security. I really like your point about TSA. Like, what more could they do? In terms of the authority, there's more that they could do with the authority. But, like, the one funny thing I have about TSA is that because they are an appearance of security, and that's kind of really their purpose, and they are deterrent, right? Like, the most stupid... Let's okay.
That's a hard job. I want to say right out front, like TSA agents, I feel terrible. Like, you guys go through the ringer. It is a tough job.
Yeah, like nobody's happy going through TSA, except for when you have pre-check, and it's like the best thing ever. That, yes. But like my favorite thing is there's a comedian that talks about all the liquid bombs.
Yeah,
and he's like, "Oh, I'm just gonna throw away this liquid bomb next to all the other liquid bombs because it's one more ounce more liquid bomb than the other liquid bombs."
Yeah.
And it's a good point. It's like, okay, my thought process is like, what, like, again, you said about TSA, like, what more can we do? But if you're talking to the field in terms of the actual theater, what are some things that emergency managers should be thinking through? We mentioned cameras, we mentioned lights, we mentioned maybe, the theater of deterrence or the actual stations, 911 stations. What else would you put into place to help people?
Yeah, so a lot of the stuff that we try to do, accessibility, so that when something's happening, that you're getting that message across in as many ways as you can. So we have like we had electronics. I'm not there anymore, so I'm speaking past tense. But I love that school. I was there for a very long time. I went to school there. It's my alma mater. I love it. We would use visual cues. There's a lot of stuff that you can do ahead of time just through like clear marking. And you have to remember, like, during a crisis, people are not going to be thinking straight. So every sort of security piece that you have has to be intelligently placed. Like, you don't want doors locking that for some reason people can't get out in the event of an emergency, or in some cases get in. So that was one of the things that we always had is like, do you lock down the campus during an active shooter? Because now you're essentially stranding people outside. So, that's something that every single campus has to think about. Corporate campus, is that what you want to do? And then at what point, how are people letting people in? All this stuff has to be thought about, but that's again where it gets down to like talk to your stakeholders and make sure that they're involved. So one thing I tried to do was get students involved. So I always had interns when I was an emergency manager, and made sure that they attended all the meetings with me and that they weren't just like there to take notes. I would look to them as experts. Like, they're the ones who are going to class and eating lunch and sleeping on campus potentially. So, are these functioning for you, and what holes do you see? So, for a while we were having a lot of issues with people propping doors open at night. Vermont gets very cold. Like, it was minus 25 here last week or 2 weeks ago. So when you prop a door open, pipes freeze, things break. But because it was like, I don't remember what the exact cause was, or some issue with the card thing, students were basically doing it to bypass having to like go all the way around the building, and it was the most convenient entrance. So that stuff happens. Other things like paths, like we had all these really like well-lit paths and stuff, but we noticed like students were crossing through this one field all the time, which was dark at night. But that was how students were getting to and from classes. So they eventually paved that path and then put lights there, and students took it, and now you have what was a sketchy walk is now safe. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do by just asking people, what makes them feel, where do you feel vulnerable? What kind of stuff do you think would make you feel safer?
I think that's an excellent point. It reminds me of like Ohio State University. So
you mean like Ohio State?
Okay, my quip about the Ohio State. ESPN made all of my friends outside of Ohio, because I'm from Ohio,
Mhm.
say the Ohio State, like emphasize it. But no one from Ohio actually says the Ohio
I
State.
know. Is there another
You know,
Ohio State? I feel like it's,
there's
uh,
Ohio University,
yeah. Oh,
but
that's a
still
different thing though.
everyone still says Ohio. Like
Okay.
it's more common to say Ohio for Ohio State than Ohio for Ohio University.
Interesting.
Yeah, because like such a small campus. It's like it's out in the boonies too. It's in Athens.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
we're UVM, and it's the University of Vermont, and that has to do with Universitas Viridius Montes. Like, it's University of the Green Mountains, and,
ooh,
for whatever reason, so they go UVM, and people are like, "Don't you mean, like, UVT?"
you,
We're like,
you,
"No,
no.
no."
Well, we also say CPM in our industry,
Oh, yeah.
and the M is the Roman numeral for thousand, which is dumb. Like just CPT. Okay. People have a big problem with T.
Yeah.
Um,
Huge
maybe
problem with
because of the
T's.
British.
Yeah. Sure, let's blame them.
It's like ingrained in our culture. Okay, so yeah, I like the idea. So Ohio State, they do this thing where they watch essentially the student populations moving, and they have this grounds called the Oval,
Yeah.
and there are the most random walkways every which direction. It doesn't follow any kind of pattern. The only thing it follows is if there was a class that was in A and a new class that was created in B, those students will just walk there, and so they'll just create a new brick
Yeah.
or a new cement walkway. And I think that's smart. I think it's okay to say, like, instead of just like trying to corral everybody, trying to use their natural inclination to help them just be safer.
Yeah,
And
yeah, and
and
that's common in a lot of planning now, not just in, like, emergency management, but public planning and stuff, like,
mm,
make the environment work for people, which is important for emergency management as well. So, in that same sense, like, if you go to large stadiums and stuff, they design the entryways, where trash cans are placed. Like, it may seem random that there's, like, a trash and recycling can in the middle of a hallway in this huge, space, and it's not because they're like, well, we just want to make sure people throw stuff out here. Some of those are actually designed to essentially break up the crowd as they get to the doors.
I'm really curious. So you're talking about breaking up the crowd by using
Yes.
essentially natural barriers.
Yeah. So when you have the barriers there, as they're approaching, it's like a rock in a stream, and it actually sort of disperses people out around so that when
Mm,
they get to the doorways, they're not all piled up. And they learned that from, I mean, I think it was soccer games originally, where you'd have crushing incidents when people were panicking trying to get out of stadiums and stuff. So
mm,
that type of design you should have everywhere. You can have it in malls, you can have it in your offices. Again, like, the whole point is to make these security features work. If they're not working for people, then what is the point of it? I honestly don't understand. Like, it's
no
just,
point.
then it's worse than security theater. You're actually creating a detriment to security.
Well, that comes into the personnel part because a lot of campuses hire, third party security forces, your security guards essentially, and uh, one one potential issue is, for example, we had a quote unquote scary event at our facility, and it turned out to be not that big of a deal. And one of the maintenance guys, I was talking to him, and he's like, yeah, so if there was like a real world scenario where there were like bad guys were coming into our federal building, I would just like go up to the security guard and he was trying to run away and say, hey, can I take your weapon?
Yeah.
Like he had no hope in this guy, but I knew a lot of the other guys who would do the right thing. But in either way, like there's a security presence. How can you make that security presence work? And that's definitely a real world thing because as soon as real world happens, if you're on a federal a building or land, you're going to be calling the Federal Police Service. You're going to be calling different agencies, and so all of a sudden you have a multi-agency coordinated effort to deal with this. As the emergency manager, i.e., the emergency coordinator, to dealing with the situation, what would be your quote unquote? Okay, I have to like checklist to deal with outside security versus inside security.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it comes down to, like, planning and exercising for the most part. You want to have those people involved early on, even in the design. So right before I left, we were building redesigning a new athletic facility, and the local fire department was heavily involved in how uh, the fire alarm system was going to function, such as like overrides for speakers for the PA system and stuff. What was going to be displayed on the giant screens and everything.
Mm.
The other thing is like trying to plan for that incident as well. So identifying where your command post is going to be, especially like, again, Vermont gets really cold and the weather can be awful. If you can set up a command post inside somewhere and work nice and warm, you're going to have a much better time. So depending on the scenario, a lot of times we would sort of like, once the situation was stabilized enough that maybe we can move to somewhere a little bit more safe, we would do that. But again, it all comes down to sort of like proper planning. And when you're talking about proper planning in disasters, that can be really challenging. You don't know what the big disaster is going to be. A lot of times, like some of the stuff that I was dealing with, I had no idea I'd have to figure this out. A broken pipe in the top floor of a multi-floor building with lots of expensive equipment, potentially, priceless research, that is going to cause a lot of issues. So you have to figure out how to address that on the fly. Like that's not something I've ever thought of. Like, well, it's a flood, but it's inside the building. It doesn't affect the outside of the building, but it affects everyone that's working in there. So, as we sort of catalog these things, like making sure you're doing those after actions, you're taking the lessons learned, having a good network so that you don't have to come up with all the scenarios.
Yes.
Like you said, the Ohio State, their emergency managers are awesome. I have leaned on the university and college caucus, even though I'm not a higher ed emergency manager anymore. I'm still in touch with all those folks because they were so helpful. So trying to take advantage of your network is huge. I think that's like one of the most important things in emergency management. I would take a good networker and public speaker over someone who's got a million certifications and degrees. It's just you're collaborating. That's everything that you have to do.
I get nervous when I walk into an EM's office and they have on their wall every ICS certificate, and they have like their online 30-minute education certificate like on the wall.
Or the name that just on LinkedIn that's like this long. Like I'm totally down.
Gosh.
You want to highlight some like, CEM, your masters, like that stuff takes some time. Absolutely. I don't put anything in just because I'm like I've got constant imposter syndrome. So I'm always like, I don't deserve this. I'm just a nobody. I am noticing that I look ghastly under this other camera, though.
Whatever, you're fine. It's like a ghost. Just
I'm glowing. I mean, it's winter in Vermont. I haven't seen the sun in about 4 months. So.
Yeah, it looks like you're like in Alaska, like mid.
And now you can clearly see all the board games that I had in the background and the stuff that I'd placed out of range of the camera. For the audio people, we're just gonna have to describe this. You're not gonna see it. So
that's a good plug. We don't have a lot of people on our YouTube channel, although we just crossed. It's funny. We have like 18 to 19,000 people listening to the show, and we have 100 subscribers. But we just hit 100 subscribers on YouTube. So
that's awesome.
We'll take it. Hey, I'm grateful.
I'm one of them. Yeah, I believe in it.
Well, Steve Kerr's episode, man, people are commenting left and right on YouTube, which just shows like the conversations happening there too, which is pretty cool. But in terms of like walking through all those scenarios, yeah, my famous story is that I asked a maintenance person. Like I said, I went everywhere, all over this campus in DC, and it was healthcare.
Yeah.
And I was talking to everybody, had lots of interviews, and one guy said, every winter I get really nervous that brick wall is going to break when it freezes and thaws, and that's where our power is for this hospital.
Yeah.
And so that guy gave me that advice and my due diligence. So I started working with our COOP person and whatever, and we created this MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, for the the largest contract in the National Capital Region for dry ice, because it was a research hospital.
Wow. Yeah.
That winter, froze, broke, dropped onto the power. We lost all the power. -80 freezers, millions and millions and millions of dollars of research, and 2 hours later, no problem, because all the dry ice was automatically coming in, put it around those freezers. We brought in generators, and 6 hours later, essentially the issue had taken care of itself. If we had not done that, we would have had a major problem.
Well, we had a scenario where we did have the major problem. We had a prolonged windstorm outage that actually took out a multi-phase power system, which is not something you can just repair. And the buildings backup power was only designed to sort of carry out. So here's again, being a higher ed emergency manager, like you have to be a generalist. You have to be able to do everything.
Yes.
So I went to our research center and I was helping move freezers around to the various plugs because the ones that like we knew could last 48 hours or whatever, those were not the priority plugged into the backup system. So we had to just like move stuff around and kind of finagle this power setup so that we could keep it running while trying to figure out backup generation. And I don't know
Mm.
if you know how, I mean, you probably do because you helped figure this out, but backup generators for a huge building are insanely expensive.
Oh yeah.
And every single plan for every single, university and hospital and government building has them on the plans until it comes time to cut the check and they have to start figuring out where those things are going to go and who's going to
Mm.
pay for it. And it's almost always sort of like the first thing that gets yanked. So having the ability to sort of like adapt on the fly and solve that, dry ice is great.
Mm.
We kind of just plugged stuff around and moved it around, and we made do. It was fine, but it was challenging. But we had worked with the researchers, we had worked with that college to sort of have an emergency plan in place.
Mhm.
So it was inconvenient, but it wasn't a crisis. And if we had not done that ahead of time, the whole don't trade business cards during a disaster thing, that would have been a much, much more challenging event. So,
Man, you just highlighted so many important things. Inconveniences are not
yeah,
crises. Man, talk about like the quote. We got to like put that quote down somewhere and put it on social media because like I think people forget that sometimes. And problem solvers, emergency managers are problem solvers. You're talking through like, hey, we had for our level of understanding, maybe a quote unquote black swan, not even on the radar of what we had to do, and yet you still were a problem solver in that. And that's kind of like security in a lot of ways. And EM for security is you're doing all the planning. The plan, the process is just as important as the product, especially with security, because I'm not the security guard. I'm not the sheriff. I'm not the federal police service. But guess what? If they show up on site, I need to be able to speak their language and to be able to tell them exactly what's happening. Oh, and by the way, all the people that hired you to be the EM don't know what EM is,
yeah,
and they think you are the guy with the gun. And so, like, there's the officer, right? So there's a language there, there's a coordination there, and getting people on board is so incredibly important. So great call out. In terms of wrapping up this episode, as we're looking into like the final stages here, we're talking about a couple different processes throughout. We're talking about the grounds, we're talking about the planning, we're talking about coordinating with other groups. Is there another piece that needs to be included in here? And if not, what do we do now? Like, what's the emergency manager do right now after listening to this episode?
yeah. I mean, the biggest thing is to sort of, you talked about when you were walking through buildings. That's what I did for lunch. So, like, to get out of my office and just walk around, I'd go around and poke around the
Mm.
campus and try to find, because you just don't know when something happens. If you're responsible for a facility, you got to have at least some understanding. And for a university, there's lots and lots of facilities. I think there's hundreds of buildings that we were involved in. So, get to know your community and your constituents. And I can't tell you how many times just walking around, I ran into someone and it turned into a small conversation, which then turned into, a solution later on. Like, see a facilities person working on something and you're like, hey, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, we have this issue. We're having power problem or something. You're like, okay, well, I'm going to put that in the back of my mind because I know that there's a lab upstairs that has, those minus whatever freezers for specimens, and
Mhm.
we need to preserve those. So check. Awesome. And you may come across stuff that's before disasters occurred, like you're seeing it ahead of time. So yeah, I think I just can't, foot stomp this enough. Like, get to know your people and network. I wish I had known that earlier. I knew it earlier. I just was nervous about it because again,
Mhm.
the sort of imposter syndrome. I was like, do I actually belong here? What I discovered is if you wear like an orange or green vest and you carry a clipboard around, you can pretty much get into anything. And
I-
so you just start showing up to meetings, and people honestly usually don't send you out of a meeting. They assume you're supposed to be there. So I attended a lot of the police meetings, the hospital meetings and stuff. And eventually people were like, I guess he should be here. And they started inviting me. So, you got to get your foot in the door, get to know everyone. And eventually, you're the person. So where you're fighting to get invited
Mm.
initially. Eventually, they call you because they're like, "We need him here. We need Zack to come here and help out." And again, like physical security is. I don't think you even want to think of it as something separate from emergency management. It's part of it, right? Like
Yes.
you have to know what you're going to do to protect people, through protective actions, and then you have to know how your buildings are going to react in a crisis. And you're going to invest in that. You're going to do mitigation. You're going to do, enhancement. So it's almost like it's not. It's weird that it's treated separately, but it's 100% in your purview. You may not be the one who does it or is the expert in it, but you have to deal with it.
Okay, this is the problem with me. This is where I'm going to want to talk way too long because you just highlighted. I don't know if it's like the giant bright light on your face right now.
It is very angelic.
That makes you look so bright. No, but you had a lot of great comments. First of all, I like how in your closing remarks, essentially, you just highlighted a major security issue. If I'm wearing a vest, I can probably get into anywhere.
Oh yeah,
is a real problem.
Well, if you're a hospital, if you got the white coat, it's the same thing, right?
Yeah, just walk right through. Walk like. So I've done that actually with EM all the time. Like, yeah, I just like act like I own it, and I do. But really, what you're calling out is from like not like a major security threat issue, is that showing up is half the battle.
Yes.
Like just fighting to be there and to be heard and to be. I understand some imposter syndrome. I remember that being in college and DHS coming over to facility, and I was like, "What's going on?" And then I had like the worst coworker in the world. I have no problem saying that she was horrible. She was a horrible person, but she was just like making us look bad, like left and right. And
well, that's another. That's
whatever.
I wonder. I'm just gonna put a point on that because one of the things that I found with working with some people is that they think they have to be the expert. And so they start talking and what they do is reveal they don't know anything. They're just like running their mouths. And I think as an emergency manager, like a really good emergency manager loses the ego. Like you don't have to be the expert in everything. You really do have to be the generalist. So there's a lot of times where like people are like, well, what about this? I don't know. I'm going to go call, Chief Bilodeau from UVM Police, and I'm going to ask him because I'm not the police expert. He's the expert. When I was dealing with, we had some concerns all of a sudden with like earthquake risk. Like, somebody discovered we're in a moderate earthquake zone. So I was like, well, where am I going to go? I'll go to the geology department where we have earthquake experts. You have a lot of people in your organization, whether you know it or not. They may not be experts like professionally, but they may have a hobby where they're really into it. So just like don't let perfect get in the way of good enough is often what I deal with.
Yes.
Just solve the problem. And if you don't know, that's totally cool. You can be a bad coworker and not know. That's more important than being the know-it-all coworker who doesn't, gets you into trouble because they say, I think I know how to solve this, and they don't.
Yeah.
But again, it just comes down to, again, the networking and utilizing that's a resource. That's a huge resource. Just, those people around you.
Yeah. It also makes you look a lot better too. A little humility goes a long way. This is why I like the podcast. I tell people it's like my personal masterclass because I get to interview people who I think are super interesting and have backgrounds and experiences that I want to hear from, that I get to learn from. And so every week I feel like I'm gaining a little bit more. And, lo and behold, 3 years into this, I feel like I'm in a totally different place than I was, just a few years ago. And I'm one of those guys who I'm also like on LinkedIn. I don't put like CM. I don't put my master's. I don't put all that stuff. It's just like, you know who I compare it to actually is Rodney Melsick. Rodney Melsick is the goat of emergency planning. No one will ever be able to touch him. He doesn't do any letters after his name. So if I can get to Rodney Melsick's level, it's just like then I'll know I made it. But
yeah,
great call outs in all ways. And so as we're wrapping up here, I just want to say thank you, Zack, again for coming on. Talking about security doesn't get talked about nearly enough in EM. Especially because we focus so much on the agency side and not the organizational side and a campus. Wow. So lots of great experiences, great advice to the field. And so thanks again for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been awesome. Sorry about the camera stuff. So people who are watching this, you're going to get a real show.
It's in our history. We don't usually edit, so you'll probably see me doing this waving my hands at some point hilariously. But it's been fun. It's been good. It's been a good time. I'm sure we'll have you back on. If you liked what Zack said, if you liked this episode, if it made you think more about security and emergency management with security, whether it's physical or people or planning or otherwise, we would love to hear about it on one of our social media channels for Disaster Tough Podcast. I also have to do my shameless plug. It does mean something to us if you give us a 5-star rating and subscribe. Tell us what you thought in a very positive way. Also, we get other kinds of feedback too, and we actually really appreciate it. So just sending us feedback. We want to learn. We want to keep creating a better show. So make sure you listen to us. Also, check out the Readiness Lab. It's a podcast network of which we're part of. Send us a comment. Let us know on social media that, hey, I really like Zack's episode. I wish Scuttlebutt would come on to the Readiness Lab. You can just do a nice job for us there. That'd be awesome. And we will see you next week.